This weekend podcast that we're not doing this week.
Jesus doesn't think you're a freak, or if he does, he thinks you're a freak in a good way.
Trust me, you two, I know what normal talk is.
Last week we talked about our nominations for the 2023 PluggedIn Movie Awards. And, you know, for every movie that made the list, I think we had about 6 that didn't. And with some of those movies, we practically ended up, well, coming to blows over which ones were going to end up on the list. Hey everyone, Adam Holz here, your host of the Plugged In Show, focused on the family's weekly conversation about entertainment, pop culture, and technology. Thanks for joining us. Well, on the Plugged In Show last week, we told you about all 20 nominees that we've chosen in 4 different categories: Best Movies for Kids, Teens, Adults, and Best Christian Movie. And you can go to pluggedin.com/blog and see those entries and vote for the one that you like the most. And as I mentioned last week, this meeting is one of our favorites of the year because, well, we get to get all of our personalities out at the same time and just bash them together for like 3 hours and see, you know, what comes out of the wreckage. So, lest you think that we are some sort of bastion of groupthink where we all just march in lockstep, I thought it would be fun, and we thought it would be fun to let you see what it's really like when the proverbial and rhetorical gloves come off. And we really had some spirited conversations, and I don't know that we'll recreate those conversations in their entirety, but we might give you a sense for how we think about movies, how we deal with certain content issues that make something not a slam dunk. You know, does that push it out of bounds? How heavily do we weight that? And I think at the bigger sort of more macro level, just thinking about how do we have conversations with people close to us when we have strong disagreements, which if you have teenagers, you have those talks every day.
Yeah.
Ask me how I know. With no further ado, let's get started. Joining me today are Emily Chow, Paul Acey, Kennedy Unthank, and our very own Bob Hoos. Thanks for joining me today.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Hello.
Well, hello. And now we
Hello.
will do funny voices. No, we won't, because that's actually not our day job, or even, we don't even moonlight as funny voice people.
No.
Although you do a little bit, Bob.
Yeah, just normally.
So, as we talked about movies for the Plugged In Awards recently, we had some moments, I thought.
Yep.
And I wanted to just throw a couple of those movies out there on the table and say, what was it that we liked about these movies that people were, you know, pretty passionate about, and what ultimately sort of maybe pushed it off the list?
And what was the pushback? Yeah.
What was the pushback? So,
well, I'll bring up an easy one.
Okay.
One that was probably on the table for like 2 minutes before we ultimately decided no, but it was still a consideration, was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
That movie has a lot of content concerns,
Yeah.
which ultimately was the reason why we decided we're probably not going to bring this one up.
But a very creative and interesting film.
Yes, definitely one of the most creative films of 2022, I'd say. But one of the most positive things that it was talking about was this. It was grappling with this idea of existential dread. Of how do we live in a world that has no ultimate purpose. And it got to this idea that we were able to kind of bring about, you know, in our review, talking about how, you know, the Bible says a lot of the same thing in Ecclesiastes, except it ties it in saying, well, there is no point to existence except for glorifying God. And we were able to look at that movie and see, oh, well, this is really, in a way, it's helpful to get people to start thinking about these things, about what it means to exist as a human being and what it means to be a person, and how that relates to how we interact with the world around us. And like I said, ultimately, we decided, no, we're not going to do that one because there are quite a few content issues in it. But it was an interesting message that we wanted to talk about.
As you mentioned last week, those kind of connective ideas and themes are what we're always looking for.
Yep.
You know, are there things in these movies that make us think, make us question, make us work our way through an idea? And that one definitely has it.
Yeah, it was interesting to me how many of these movies that we discussed, we can sort of anticipate
have already won awards this season, could win more awards this season. Everything Everywhere All at Once is definitely one of those. The Whale has gotten a great deal of buzz. That was another one that we were really talking about. Again, the content concerns for some of these movies are so extreme. There was just no way that we could really put them on a plugged-in movie award list in good conscience. And The Whale was a really good example of that.
Well, both of those two films have some definitely strong sexual content.
Huge issues. And yet when we watch them, I think that those of us who did watch them were moved by some of the elements that we saw. I know with The Whale, it has some interesting spiritual things that made me sort of think about my own spirituality, about my relationship to people who were trying to bring into faith, and I thought that was an interesting element.
And just the relationship between that father and his daughter, estranged daughter. I mean, it was so powerful and emotional.
Yeah.
I think these are the kind of stories that bring up something that we grapple with as a team, which is as we review movies that a lot of times are rightly rated R because of this extreme content, and both of those two movies are in that category. How do we weigh the redemptive messages versus the things that are just ugly in terms of not necessarily aesthetically ugly, but in terms of the sin and the brokenness that is depicted? Because we know as Christians that sin really is something that tears us apart. And yet sometimes as Christians, I think we want a sanitized depiction of that. And when we see it sort of unvarnished, it's hideous. Yeah. And individually in our families and for each of us on our own, we have to make the call about where does the redemptiveness of a particular movie balance against the fact that those images are hard. And I think generally speaking at Plugged In, we err in a very cautious direction in terms of taking those things seriously.
Well, and I think there's a bit of a chart that, for any movie you watch, there's, you draw your little chart, and on this side, it's the content issues.
Right.
On this side, it's the redemptive messages. And so every movie on there has a dot, but you have to kind of for your own family, and maybe even it's different for every member of your family, you draw your own line for where on the scale. So for a child, your line is going to be, if it's going across, it's going to be a little more flat. It's going to be close. It's going to lean towards the redemptive messages, whereas for an adult, you can handle a little bit more content with slightly less redemptive messages. But I think
that all comes down to the individual.
Right.
The individual adult needs to decide, okay, how much of this can I swallow? How much can I watch without thinking, oh, my goodness, turn this off?
Which actually leads us pretty well into Redeeming Love.
Yeah,
as
let's
well.
do Redeeming Love.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Bring it.
That's probably the most controversial Christian movie that came out in 2022.
Yes.
You have people who are diehard fans of it. You have people who say, "Oh, this is," go as far to say softcore pornography.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about what it is, because everybody may not be
Redeeming
familiar,
Love,
and then we'll share a funny story about the movie too.
Redeeming Love is a retelling of the story of Hosea and Gomer from the book of Hosea in the Bible. And it tells basically of this man who he feels that God has called him to go marry this prostitute. And now the prostitute, she doesn't feel like she's clean enough for him. She doesn't feel like she's good enough for him because he's a righteous man, and she has done all these horrible things in her past. She's been abused. She's had all this trauma. And so she keeps thinking, well, I just have to keep going back to essentially this...
Right.
What she knows.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And every single time he has to go back and he says, no, I still love you. I'm going to keep bringing you back time and time again. Now, that's a great story. And, it's a biblical story. And it's supposed to talk about God's relationship with us as we continuously stray away from him. The issue we had with the movie is that there are a lot of content concerns.
That would be a mild understatement, or a major one.
Specifically within the sexual realm.
Yeah. Well, and the fact is, I liked the film.
Yeah,
I did. Mm-hmm. I can be brave enough to say that, because I felt that it was a powerful picture of that story, so clear. And I also liked the dramatic aspect of it. They didn't just paint the Gomer character as this pure person interested only in satisfying her sexual needs. It wasn't that. They painted her as a real person who had suffered a great deal in her life. And like you said, most of her decision process was because she didn't believe herself good enough. And I thought that was a very powerful application to that story. And I thought it was also an emotional and moving story by the time we got to the end of it.
Yeah, and the funny story I was going to tell was that was Kennedy's first movie review for us, and we thought we were doing him a favor by sending him to a nice Christian movie. And
That's right.
And I think that it begs the question again, when we want to depict sin, how do you do that effectively on camera? And typically Christian movies err on the side of really sanitizing things, and this one was so far on the other side that my mouth was on the floor for huge segments of the movie.
For me, it makes me uncomfortable when I think, because you have to think, for every movie you're seeing, what you see on screen is only a segment of what was happening when the camera was off. Because you have to think about the fact that there is a real person who is standing there with basically nothing on and in a room. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever been on a film set, and I don't know if our viewers have, but film sets, it's not like there's 2 people in the room. Even on a closed set, you've got upwards of 10 people who are sitting there. That you've got the sound guy, you've got the director, the camera operator, the producer, the other actors in the room, or in the scene, I should say. And it's like, so even on a closed set, there's no privacy to that. And and you're taking something that is meant to be private and making it very public, even though you're disguising it with, we're going to do this clever camera angle so you don't actually see something.
Thank goodness for that fruit bowl, or this would have been rated R.
But you know, the other people on set, they're not looking through the
Exactly. No,
fruit
that's
bowl
But it is
lens.
important to note that there is no full nudity in this film.
No, there's not.
So-
But it was shocking because I felt like they got just about as close as you could possibly get. Forget for a Christian movie. For a PG-13 movie, I actually was shocked that it got a PG-13 rating. And so I think Kennedy and I came out of it. It was hard to give the redemptive elements their due because there was an eroticism to it that totally caught me by surprise, and certainly caught poor Kennedy by surprise in his
we
first
felt
movie.
that there was a sense of, if someone is here to watch a movie about redemption,
Right.
we don't want them to have, if they struggle with sexual desire, for instance,
Yeah,
that
or pornography.
we don't want them to have that temptation through a movie that's supposed to be about redemption.
Yep.
It is one of the trickiest things that we deal with on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, is that struggle, because a lot of the movies that we see, they have a good purpose in mind in some way.
Yeah.
And yet to get to that purpose, they feel like they need to show certain elements.
Yep.
And so it really becomes very much of judgment call. How much do you show to get your message across? How much do you need to pull back? You know, Bob and I are big old movie fans. We know that in the 1940s, 1950s, you could tell a great story without any content.
Without any language, without any nasty language at all. And yet it could be a completely dynamic film that keeps you riveted on the edge of your seat. And we've lost that.
We'll always have Paris.
You know, kind of to that point, there are 2 of the other movies that we debated over, She Said and Women Talking.
Yeah. Right.
And Paul and I were the table slappers for that one, that debate. And ultimately, we actually chose not to put either of them on the list because of the content concerns. For me, you know, looking at She Said, that's a R-rated movie, mostly for language. And what you just said, Bob, back in the day, you could make a great film that kept audiences engaged without uttering a single curse. But that movie had a slew of F words and other colorful language. And, you know, they didn't need it. They could have removed that language and it still would have told the story very well, I think. And if you don't know what that particular movie is about, it's about 2 New York Times reporters who broke the story on Harvey Weinstein. So it's based on a true story.
And the Me Too movement.
And they
Created it, basically.
they helped create the Me Too movement. And so essentially they were giving voice to women who previously had none, who previously felt like they were powerless to speak up about the abuse that they had faced.
Which is a great segue to talk a little bit about women talking, because that
Right.
truly is talking about these women who have had no voice. Just to get the setup, and just to warn our viewers, this was probably the most robust conversation we had. Would
Get
you
ready,
say?
I
Bob.
think it was like 20 minutes, just that
Get your
conversation
musket
alone.
loaded. 'Cause
I'll
Just like
come
the
back
length
later.
of this podcast.
So
Well, we don't have to get that heated.
So the movie, we've actually talked about this on a podcast, and I'll try to be really brief and concise, but it's about this closed religious community based on a true story of how women in this religious community were habitually abused by the men in the community. It is actually rated PG-13. The content that we see on screen is navigable, while the issues themselves are very, very difficult.
Because of the abuse.
Yes, I think Bob and I actually argued against it on 2 different points.
Yeah.
Bob, yours, I believe, was more about their portrayal of men in that film.
Well, it
was very one-sided.
Exactly. I think Paul was well, I won't speak for Paul.
Yeah, you give
He's
yourself.
right here.
no,
He can talk for
I
himself.
will.
Yes. Well,
I will say why it should have been
I
included.
looked at it and saw it to be much more of I saw it as much less dramatically cogent than I expected it to be. It was a film that dealt with the toxicity of masculinity, but it dealt with it instead of dealing with it as a dramatic format, where we meet all the characters and we see the conflicts. It was much more of a screed to me, like a liberal screed against manhood. Because, and one of the big reasons that I saw it that way, is because we never see men. We see one man in the course of the film. He is sort of the good man, the acceptable man, and he's the man who can't make decisions on his own. And he is.
And you said he cries a lot too.
Yeah, he cries a lot, and basically
There's
does.
nothing wrong with crying. We're just
But
saying that
but he
this
does-
guy in
he does
particular
what
was not.
he does what the women tell him to do. The film became much more of a diatribe then for me, as I saw it pounding a message without showing us all sides of the story. The only other man, we never see any of the men. They're more of this great group of unwashed, vile individuals who have done all these really bad things. We never meet any of them. We never hear their story. We never hear anything that they have to do in this particular story, except for one man that comes back from the city or from the town, and we never see his face. We're never shown his face. The only thing we're shown is the face of his wife and child after he beats them up. So basically, it's a very one-sided story that wants to get across this powerful message. Now, don't get me wrong. I thought it was well acted, and if you took any of the single actors, if you just plucked out their particular monologue, it would be a great soliloquy, and you would say, "Man, that is brilliantly done." But when it's all together, it's not very dramatically sound.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, that just sounds like we don't necessarily want to know the story of the abuser, and I think that's probably why they didn't show a lot of the men's faces, which I can get behind.
Didn't show
it's
any
about
men's
the
faces.
story of the people who are voiceless, these women, but at the same time, so for me, my resistance to putting this movie on the list actually had to do more with the overall theme of abuse, in that watching a movie where women, if I understand correctly, it didn't actually show the abuse, but it showed the after effects of the
Yes.
abuse. And I think that I know so many women who would, I know a lot of women who could watch that and they could stomach it and they'd be okay, but they'd be very sad. Me personally, I think if I watched that, I think I'd be sobbing the whole way through, and I don't think it would sit well with me. I think I would have nightmares afterwards. And that was actually kind of my resistance, is I was thinking about all the women in our audience who could potentially go to see this movie and leave feeling like, even with its redemptive messages, just feeling really uncomfortable and like not good. Like, I was thinking about the after effect of seeing this movie, which in my opinion, I think it's almost unnecessary in a way. But so even though it is a strong film with strong messages, it's done in a cleaner way than a lot of movies might do. I still think that topic and that theme is so difficult to approach that I think that many women and men even, I think that it'd be really difficult to watch that without feeling a little uncomfortable as you're leaving the theater.
I think those are all really valid points. So I was the one who was
Mine
really
too.
pounding. No, yours were not. Yours were not, Bob. No,
No, those all, meaning yours too.
No, I think that when we're talking about difficult movies and movies that we're considering for this list and that tend to win awards, they can be difficult movies. Last year, I think we had The Father on our list. And when I saw The Father,
Not
it
the
talks
feel-good
about
movie of the year.
No.
No, it's talking about dementia. It's talking about Alzheimer's and the troubles that you have there. You know, my family has issues with that. We have history with that, as many families do. And I did not want certain members of my family to see it because I thought that it would just be too hard to see.
And
I just watched a movie called The Son, oddly enough, about mental illness that was very, very difficult for me to navigate through. At the same time, I think that those movies can have value. While we let people know what those movies can contain, I think that they can have the value for those who can stomach what it comes with. It can be incredibly provoking in the best sense of the word when you think about some of the issues involved. And for me, one of the things that I loved about it, what you say, Bob, is absolutely right. When you're talking about it is a one-sided story.
Yeah.
It is a one-sided story. You never see these men's faces. And I think to what Emily said as she was talking about it, she could get behind that because of what the movie was trying to do. It was a purposeful reverse of what these women in this community had dealt with.
Yeah.
I personally did not see it as sort of this overall men are bad. What I saw it as
No, men are
was
terrible is what this is.
They're not merely bad.
They're not
They're
mon-
monsters.
They're not just bad.
But
Exactly.
you do see how power can corrupt, and that includes religious power. And I think that that's an issue that it's an important one for us as Americans, us as Christians, those of us who tend to find ourselves in certain positions where we have authority. How do we use that authority? How do we navigate that? How do we treat those around us with respect and honor and love? This movie shows the antithesis of that. And the thing that I really resonated with is you can see elements throughout history. This is based on a true story. You see elements throughout history where you see people who might have been good people under other circumstances who are turned bad. You look at the concentration camps. And I'll end with this. The other thing that resonated with me is it talks about all of this within the crucible of faith.
Yes.
These women are women of faith. The faith that they have experienced in this community has damaged them incredibly terribly, right? The faith that they have grown up with is not the faith of true Christianity. It's not the faith of our Father. To watch them struggle with what they've been raised to believe, what they know to be true, and still cling to that beauty of faith, that power of faith, as they seek to have, to keep them and their children safe, was incredibly powerful.
Well, I would agree. I think their faith element was the strongest element of the film. But one thing you mentioned, and this will be the last thing I say about it. The one thing you mentioned was that
I'm gonna hold you both to
it was based on a true story. That's true, but it wasn't an actual true story. It wasn't depicting the true story. At the very top of the film, it says that the whole film was created from the imagination of a female. Okay, so yes, what they've done is they've taken this story and they've, or the director and writer, and they've reshaped the story so that it delivers their message. And it becomes this pure message film, and that's what bothered me the most about it. Not the faith aspect, because I appreciated the faith aspect, except that the men, of course, were all these vile things that can't even stand by their own faith. But the fact that they're reshaping this to just pound home a message rather than creating a picture, an idea, a dramatic story that helps us think through it and walk away going, here's what I believe.
This is one of the beauties of the conversations that we have, right? Because this conversation went on for a good 20 minutes, right?
Almost
Today?
again.
We've actually done a pretty good redo right here.
But I do.
But that was the point, too.
But that was the point. I think that's when we deal with movies, we bring, not only do the movie creators bring what they want to create to the table, but we bring our own experiences, our own outlook, our own ideals to the table as well.
And the same when we watch them.
Exactly.
I mean, you guys are sitting right next to each other, but you experience this movie in a very different way.
Very differently. And I think that's important to understand, that different movies can impact us all so differently, and that includes us on the Plugged In team. Something can really resonate with us, while another person on the team, it can leave them cold. And that's one of the beauties of our team, I think.
Right.
Well, and when we write reviews, I mean, to move it out, even another level, we try to keep all of that in mind. What do we need to say that's going to help the broadest number of people to understand what we're dealing with here? And sometimes you may read one of our reviews and you may have a disagreement with part of our perspective. But our hope is that our reviews are not yes, no, here's the answer, but that they can be a catalyst for conversation in your family. Sometimes, a catalyst for conversation just internally. We may just be wondering, should I watch this or not? Do I need to see this?
Even we as Plugged In team members have, when we've seen a film together, or we've seen it at different times, before the review is even created, we had this kind of a conversation.
Exactly.
And we hammer it out back and forth because we want to have the best review possible.
Exactly.
We want to try and cover as many sides of the equation as we can, and then give readers something that they can walk away with and say, okay, well, what do I think about this, and how do I work this particular film in my world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope as you've listened today, you've gotten a deeper sense for how deeply and how seriously we take the jobs that we do. And we hope that it serves you and your family, and maybe even can be something that helps you to communicate, especially if you have kids moving into their teen years. You can have really different opinions on things, right? And I hope that you've seen, especially with Bob and Paul just now, the back and forth of listening to each other, of hearing each other, of understanding where that person has come from. And yet after that, sometimes as a parent, we still have to make the decision, right? And there's kind of a dance there between, all right, we're doing this because this is what we need to do, but I want to hear from you as well. So I hope that this conversation has been another data point in perhaps what that can look like in your own family life.
It doesn't have to be an argument.
Exactly.
It can be a discussion.
Exactly.
And
Although
that's
it can get
that's the
close.
point.
It can get close.
Yeah, well,
Now you're now arguing about whether we're arguing. All right. On that note, I think our time in this conversation is through for today. Thanks, everybody.
sure.